Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our seminar. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to ISIS, and it's also a great honor for us to welcome General Prakash Menon. Welcome back, rather, I would say, because he's spoken here before. So today we will be discussing emerging technologies, force modernization, and stability in nuclear South Asia. So let me first briefly introduce the General and our discussant, Dr. Shunak Set, and then we'll kind of open up with some comments. The General will speak for a while, then Dr. Set will discuss, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So let me introduce our two eminent speakers. So General Prakash Menon is the director of the Strategic Studies Program at Takshashila Institution.
I think
he is also Professor Emeritus at Transdisciplinary University, Bangalore, and adjunct Professor, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. He has a very illustrious career in the Indian Army, which included kind of a stint as the commandant of the National Defense College and as Major General Staff of Army's Northern Command. He also was military advisor and secretary to the government of India, and from 2015 as officer on special duty in the National Security Council Secretariat. He has been very decorated and in many ways doesn't really need an introduction. So we are very, very honored and very happy to have him here. And also it's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Shunak Set, who is now a research fellow with the South Asia program at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, RSIS, at Nanyang Technological University. Before this, he was at King's College London, and we, by the way, shared the same supervisor there, Harsh Pant. So it was so we have kind of long-standing connection in this respect. He at King's he was the European Commission's Marie Curie Fellow. He has been widely published in the Cambridge Review of International Relations, China Review, Russia Journal, and Strategic Analysis. He's kind of a rising star in our field, I would argue. And well, today he will be discussant on the topic. Moreover, his last position before he started at the RSIS was as lecturer in defense studies with KCL and the UK Defense Academy at Sri Lanka. So, welcome, gentlemen. And before we start, I think it's very important to realize the great sensitivity and complexity of the topic that we are going to discuss. So we are living in many ways in what some scholars have called a third nuclear age. An age of growing nuclear instability, an age in which the newly rising nuclear powers, different disruptive technologies such as outer space capabilities or AI, for example, an age also in which arms control has in many ways collapsed in the last several years. So on this background, South Asia has in many ways emerged as a particularly complex and crisis-prone region in terms of nuclear stability. Why? Because obviously South Asia is the home of three great nuclear powers, China, India, and Pakistan. And China can be defined in some ways as a power in South Asia to a great extent because its role in the region, security role including, has grown immensely in the last 15, 20 years. But also we see a massive nuclear buildup in the region. Both India and Pakistan are building up their nuclear capabilities, but also very importantly, China is gradually emerging as the third major pole of the international nuclear order. Historically, the international nuclear order was bipolar. It was Russia and also Soviet Union and the United States. For the first time in history, we are moving toward a tripolar nuclear world order. It still hasn't arrived, but we're close. And we don't know exactly how this is going to work, because most of the literature that we have on strategic studies and on nuclear arms is entirely based on a bipolar nuclear world with several small powers. And of course, we have doctrinal changes in strategic thinking in all three powers. We have also kind of the emergence of various technologies which in many ways disrupt the nuclear balance. So there are a lot of questions. How is this going to impact nuclear stability? How is all this going to impact, for example, the nuclear postures of the actors in the region? So a lot of questions, and we are very fortunate to have General Menon to help us tackle with this question. So, sir, please, to you.
Thank you, and thank you, RSIS and ISAS for this seminar. It's always an honor and privilege to be here. And I have actually been told to speak on three issues. One is emerging technologies and its impact on nuclear South Asia. Then, how does the emerging technologies influence modernization, which in turn affects strategic stability in South Asia? And the third issue is about what are the changes of postures which we are finally, is there a change of posture? What is the process and trajectory of that, and what does it mean? So these are three broad issues on which I'm going to speak. Let me first start with actually putting these topics in context, because unless we see South Asia in the context of what is happening in the globe, at the global level, we will be missing the woods for the trees. It's important to understand where does this stand in the larger gameplay. The larger gameplay, as we all know, is about the struggle between China and the United States of America. That's the larger gameplay. And obviously, in nuclear terms, what China does or what it develops and how it is thinking is mostly, if not fully, influenced by their struggle as they see it with the United States of America. It is not about their struggle in South Asia with India or Pakistan, which is their close friend. So it is into this context where the relationships which will prevail between the USA and China will also finally overshadow some things which will happen in South Asia. And that is the connection which we need to actually understand. Although South Asia will have problem of its own, but the fact is, I think we need to understand the relationships. So, in terms of technology, which is the first topic which you're talking about, I think we should be very clear that in strategic terms, technology is always contestable. Somebody can develop technology, convert it into military power, but that itself can be contested. That's how it works. It's not like one side always manages to keep up. It can, not that it's impossible, that it's got certain type of capabilities which technology bestows on it, which cannot be confronted by the other. That is very rare. Over a period of time, and especially since technology easily diffuses these days, all sort of advantages we see of those nations which have seemed to be ahead of the others also have a time limit to it. While at the same time, something new might also be, some new technological development can also come into the arena. So let's just look at the story which we are now hearing about what Anthropic has just released only to very few specialized corporate entities. It's an artificial intelligence called Mythos. I don't know if you have heard of that. Mythos. Mythos has the capability to actually look at the cyber world and the cyber systems and find loopholes in the system. Now, in the initial reaction for everybody is that if this spreads, then the entire world which is dependent upon the cyber world would be vulnerable to people who would want to exploit it. And so they have taken a decision that they are first going to give it to only trusted and quote corporate entities, because they are the ones who will probably give them the money also for it, which they must have spent a lot to actually develop it, to try it out on their own systems. And they are supposed to keep some sort of this thing on how it is being used. But let's take it that this sort of development is not going to be a one-time development which only Anthropic has probably be able to develop. It will probably spread to many other entities which will have the power to develop such artificial intelligence. And then what can happen is that every system, remember the world today runs on this on the very foundation of which in most systems is the electromagnetic spectrum. That spectrum is the foundation on which the whole world runs. Look at it in any way. So it will always also be the case that people will also develop systems in which they'll not only be able to actually spot the problems within a system, they'll be able to quickly patch it before somebody else can do something to it. That will probably be the counter which will actually emerge. That is why I said that technology is contestable. So what we initially think may prevail for some time, but that vulnerability will finally get closed up. So in terms of the nuclear systems, which is what we have to actually worry, how does it really concerns the nuclear systems? The main system in the nuclear world of the nuclear arsenal is the command and control system. And that system, if it can be interfered with, can paralyze the entire thing of a use of nuclear weapons. You know, when the Americans carried out the raid on Venezuela, they put off all the lights, put off all the AD systems. They're free to do what they want. See the power which they had, because the Venezuelans didn't have any counter to it. Similarly, all nuclear command and control systems are vulnerable, and that is why there will be n number of redundancies which are normally built into the system to don't get into a situation where somebody can actually hack into it and paralyze your systems. So the world of cyber and the world of, you can say, ability to cause harm or to defend against it will always be now a game which will increase in its momentum, scale, and scope. So this will continue for as long as, especially the nuclear command and control system, depends upon the electromagnetic spectrum. There is nothing which you can do about it. Because if you look at the command and control systems and look at the plans which are made, the types of checks and balances so that, it doesn't suddenly, some madman doesn't, just one person cannot actually let go nuclear weapons. There are a whole lot of checks and balances built into it. Yet somebody from the outside can do worse by paralyzing the system. So, all these, what technology in terms of the nuclear arsenal is concerned, is about how technology, whether it is cyber or our dependence on space assets, because we require that for intelligence, recce, surveillance, you name it, communications, and so on. It will be all systems on which there is greater dependence will be the targets of people who want to do you harm when they want to do it. That is part of the strategic world. That is how the strategic world functions. That you have to find out vulnerabilities and how do you exploit vulnerabilities. This is the principle of strategy. And these vulnerabilities are not something which will remain forever. It's an ongoing game which never finishes. That is the struggle, especially between powers which are competing with each other, who fear the threat from another and can do them great harm. Even in normal times, it is always looking out for what are our vulnerabilities and what do we do about it. What about the vulnerabilities on the other side and what can we do about it? This is the constant game. This game is not going to change. And nuclear weapons have this major power that it can play even with a slight wave of the hand. It has the ability, because of the sheer scale of destruction it can cause and the speed of destruction, it has the ability that whenever nuclear weapons and somebody who even shows it to the other, like Putin did just before he invaded Ukraine, if you remember, he just reminded NATO and the US that I've got nuclear weapons also, so don't try to actually. No, it was not even a direct, it was something which he waived. In fact, that what you can say, that is how nuclear weapons has been used so far, and that is probably the only practical use which you can make of it. The use of nuclear weapons is in its non-use. The moment you start using against another nuclear power, remember, you can always be visited by a couple of nuclear weapons, and that itself can cause you damage which will probably be unacceptable to you. A very heavily populated China, India, and Pakistan cannot even, leaders cannot even think of actually trading even one city for losing one city for something larger which you want to gain, because the scale of damage is so big. And that is the power, that is why nuclear weapons are different from conventional weapons which we normally encounter. The power of nuclear weapons to directly influence the minds of the decision makers on the other side, that is tremendous amount of power. That is why whenever there is, most of the time, whenever there is a, you can say, an exchange of blows between India and Pakistan, for a long time, and I think in Sindhu they didn't do it. The first thing which Pakistan used to do is to convene their National Security Nuclear Council. They just hold a meeting of the Nuclear Council, that's all. That's the messaging. You can ignore the message, but there is a limit to which political leaders who are responsible for their population to ignore such messages. It has to be in the back of their minds. So, the other problem which now comes about is, because of artificial intelligence and the ability of artificial intelligence to produce, to play a major role in the world of information, by actually faking videos, messages, scenarios, that it can create a complete world of its own which does not exist, and that world may or could influence either adversely or otherwise the decision maker on the other side. It's a danger. Something which may not exist, you can make up a story which is completely off, but the fact is, remember, when nations are practically at the stage at which either there is an ongoing war or there is a high level of tension, then the human being who are heads of these are not normal people in the sense that we understand. They are like you and me. They have to actually be, they're responsible for so many lives, they have to take so many decisions, and if the situation is such, to expect them, especially with individuals who run the own state, who have all the powers, it can influence them adversely, especially if the world of information has been contaminated through the use of artificial intelligence. So the information world, which influences beliefs and decision making, can be affected by artificial intelligence. I'm just giving you an example to actually tell you that what these technologies can actually do, because they can influence the mind of the decision makers. That's where you're trying to affect, to create the impact. And of course, the space, which is another area which is something which actually, where again dependency is rising in terms of communications, navigation, surveillance, you name it. And as I said, as the dependency rises, the vulnerability also rises. Now you can actually start off something in space. Remember, as far as these three actors are concerned, China has already demonstrated an ASAT weapon. India has also demonstrated an ASAT weapon. These are all demonstrations of capability. In actual fact, you can't just destroy satellites in space because the debris which it will create will actually affect a worldwide system, so it may not be a practical thing to do. But that does not mean that you can not put a satellite out of action by electronic means or by cyber methods. Every system which you make, which is technical in nature, is vulnerable to the products of human agency, which could be another technology, or sheer brilliance of mind which produces something simple yet puts that thing out. And of course, the last thing which I want to actually tell you about the new technologies affecting is the fact that artificial intelligence has the potential for decision makers to rely more on machines than on their own minds. It is this ability of machines to take over the human mind, or at least to not give it enough chances to apply it the way we normally do, because you get used to something which brings out an answer of which you have no idea how it has reached that answer, how that logic has been applied, but you think after you see it. And this, in terms of nuclear weapons, is the speed at which you get these answers is amazing. I mean, after all, if you use any of these, the speed at which you get the answers is just mind-boggling. If decision times are going to collapse, then this can be certainly a cause for making wrong decisions. Remember that all these things which I'm talking about this decision-making thing, is at a time of high tension levels. So let me just take you to what actually happens when there is a high tension. And the worst thing which can happen is when the nuclear alert levels of weapons have gone through and they have climbed to one level or two or three levels, depending upon the system which you are practicing, in which whole lot of SOPs, standard operating procedures, kick in, and certain actions have to be taken, so you have to be ready to fire these nuclear weapons. The greatest danger as far as stability is concerned, therefore, comes from all these technological threats. They emanate from there, which collapses the decision timings. And remember, at certain alert levels, the leadership of these nuclear powers are not going to sleep in their palaces and bungalows. They will either be up in an aircraft or underground in a secret command room so that they're protected from, because they have to survive for the nuclear weapons to be used. These are part of the management of nuclear weapons. That the authority to command these nuclear weapons, and each nation would have its own drills for this. When do they go into this and that sort of thing? Who goes it? And they normally have two groups, so that one group, even if it gets taken out completely, there's another group to give the orders to fire. So, if you look at the South Asian situation, we have not come into any situation so far in which nuclear weapons have been alerted by either Pakistan, India, or China. They might have given indications of various types of alerts. That's about all. And therefore, South Asia, in my personal view, does not deserve the description of being the most dangerous nuclearized geography in the world. It has been painted in that particular mode because of Pakistan, which uses this, that we are going to have a nuclear exchange. The danger is here, and therefore it wants the uncle to intervene to stop it. This is what they have been doing. And the uncle has actually been wanting a Nobel Prize for the last time he's supposed to have done something about it. Because apart from the political rhetoric which has been displayed during heights of tension, there is nothing in the nuclear terms physically done, or maybe I think once or twice some missiles were tested and so on, which gives South Asia and makes it deserve the type of image which it has with many people of the world. There are far more dangerous places than South Asia. I am not saying there is no danger in South Asia. In fact, we must be always very careful. But so far, the leadership of all these countries have acted with a certain amount of maturity and balance when it came to how they deal with nuclear weapons, despite the rhetoric which they might have displayed. And political rhetoric is the staple food of political leaders. I think some of them cannot but restrain themselves from such activity. So, let me go to the last portion of this thing, and I'm sorry I've taken a little more time than, which is about the posture. How does these modernizations, technology, how is it influencing the posture of these two countries? Because posture makes a lot of difference. Don't forget, the most dangerous things are today, even between the Russians and the USA, they have got their alert systems much, much more higher. They believe in something called even fire on warning. There have been many escapes by, somebody puts a training tape into the computer and thinks that it is an attack which has taken place. This happened during the Cold War, I see. So even when and if you look at the alert levels even today of certain portions of the armament of the United States of America and Russia, and I made the point, the alert levels are the most dangerous things which can happen, because in alert levels, misinformation, misjudgment, misperception can actually cause the firing of even one weapon that can trigger an exchange. So, one of the things which has attracted a lot of attention has been about the Chinese developing silos in various parts, but they've got 3 major silo fields which they have developed. And of course, most analysts think that China is now shifting from its doctrine of no first use to one in which they could actually fire on warning or fire after it is, they see the radar spots some missiles coming on the way. Whereas no first use was only after they've been hit. We simply don't know. I mean, by the way, these silos are vast, spread across China, in Xinjiang, and so on. And they're quite a few in number, and that is why the numbers, the estimation of Chinese nuclear missile development has gone up quite a lot. We simply do not know how many of these silos are actually populated, how many of them are just meant as dummies. That's what you can do, you can deceive. But be that as it may, the very fact that China has gone into of creating silos shows there's something different in the way they have thought about how nuclear weapons can be initiated. Because silos give you that capability of initiating in the fastest time frame. Now, as far as India is concerned, we have steadfastly maintained that we have a no first use policy. But again, when technology is actually coming our way, and when we have these nuclear submarines which are actually going to be on patrol, and they wouldn't be going without the nuclear stuff on them, because they are supposed to be actually, even if they are on patrol, even if they are exercising, they are supposed to be, practicing while doing all that. If that is so, then is India therefore thinking about also having some of these submarines, missiles on alert? I would think not, because all these, the power to fire a submarine, a missile from a submarine, does not lie with the submarine commander. He requires to get some codes and so on transmitted to him. In fact, I think it was UK or Russia, I'm not very sure. They had this system called the dead hand, in which if something happens and the submarine feels that everybody else has been knocked off, the submarine commander had the power to open a particular safe in which these codes were kept. He could open it, feed the codes, and fire off. I mean, this was supposed to be, nobody knew whether this really actually existed, but it was a story well spread, and that's good enough for actually to deter people who might be thinking of doing something like this. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, they've already changed it. They have now have a doctrine called full spectrum deterrence, which is born of the fact that when India, some people in India had spoken about the cold start doctrine. They said that even if you just cross the line of control, we can use nuclear weapons on you. So they have, according to that deterrence, the ability, and that's why they say they have tactical weapons, the Nazar and so on, where we can target from the lowest level to the highest level. So the range of systems are like that, and that is what they call full spectrum deterrence. We must understand one thing, that as far as nuclear weapons are concerned, as far as nuclear deterrence is concerned, its power lies in the ability to create ambiguity in the minds of the others. For even one, as I told you, can have a major effect. Just one. And whatever might be the strategy that you make, we must admit, nobody knows what will happen after the first weapon has been fired against another nuclear weapon by one nuclear power. Nobody knows, because it has not happened. And let us hope it remains that way. So the stories we are being told, obviously the USA is watching China very carefully. They say China by 2030, 2035 is going to have 1,000 warheads, is already in the range of 600 and so on. India, if you look at India's and Pakistan's, whatever we say, Pakistan goes at least 10 warheads ahead, or 10 war. I mean, I don't know how they calculate these, measure these by 190 warheads and 180 warheads and so on. I find it very difficult to understand how the guy on the other side, or some guy, an academic who's sitting in some college somewhere, can actually calculate the number of warheads. That would be the closest guarded secrets of any nation. So I'm afraid that I've taken much more time that I've been given. Thank you very much. Now you can.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a fascinating tour de force of this topic. Shunak, please, we're very happy to hear your comments.
Yes. First, thank you, Ivan, for agreeing to chair this session. Thank you, Lieutenant General Dr. Prakash Menon, for giving us a very excellent and comprehensive overview. I have to admit, this is a very special occasion because I'm on a panel with two people whom I hold in high regard. Ivan is a dear friend, and this is the first time I'm meeting Lieutenant General Menon in person, but we had correspondent over a while, and his views have influenced my work a lot. So when Nishant first organized this, I was delighted, and honestly, who can say no to being on the same table as Lieutenant General Menon? He's a very influential voice on the nuclear and strategic issues in India. Now, as Ivan started the session by mentioning about the third nuclear age, I'll just go back slightly and point it out, which is often lost, is South Asia has been integral to the global nuclear order. And why do I say that? When nuclear scholars divide the nuclear history of humankind into ages, like we're talking about the third nuclear age, they talk about the first nuclear age, which was largely a bipolar nuclear contest between USA and Soviet Union. The second nuclear age actually starts with the successive Indian and Pakistani nuclear explosions in 1998, because then it demonstrates to the world that there's a rising powers with smaller nuclear arsenals, but they're a big impact on the global nuclear order now. So, in a way, it was South Asia which spawned the second nuclear age. And that, I think, kind of shows how important South Asia has been to the global nuclear landscape. Now, building on what General Menon was saying about the bilateral dynamics, the strategic dynamics, one of the key paradigms governing the strategic stability in South Asia is called the stability-instability paradox. It was originally developed in the 1950s and 60s based on East Europe when USA and Soviet Union were facing off each other in the early Cold War. What does this mean? With the nuclear weapons, you of course do not go on to fight a nuclear war directly because that has apocalyptic proportions. So at the certain level, at the strategic level, there is stability. But the paradox is that below that, at the tactical level, there's a lot of instability, a lot of minor skirmishes, military engagements can go on despite having a no conventional or a comprehensive war because of the nuclear weapons. Now, this is a framework which, again, we saw being used massively with the nuclearization of the subcontinent from the late 90s and early 2000s. We saw Pakistani sponsored terrorism, which is effectively in strategic terms an exercise in asymmetric warfare being conducted under the nuclear umbrella. And the Pakistani the Pakistani thinking was because there's a nuclear umbrella, it can continue this kind of asymmetric warfare. And Indian policymakers for a long while struggled to have a certain space, certain engagements to respond to asymmetric warfare without crossing the nuclear threshold. And this is where, as General Menon was referring, the cold start doctrines and so on came into place, where you could have very limited tactical engagements without triggering a full-scale nuclear response. Now, if you look at whatever has happened recently, and of course I'm referring to the last 1 or 2 years, particularly going back to the crisis last year with Operation Sindoor and Baniyan al-Masus, it seems that both the sides were actively trying to redraw the thresholds. For India, it was a perfect case where it felt that it has renegotiated the threshold because it gave the scope for military engagements without triggering a nuclear war. From the Pakistani side, it seems they believe that they have managed to challenge and hold off Indian military interventions. Is this static? Is this an equilibrium? Unfortunately, the answer is no. It seems, and this is, of course, an educated guess, this will go on for a while before we have some form of equilibrium or an understanding. Now, as has been alluded to, China is way more important as a factor down to operational and tactical levels that we had not historically been seen, which means when we're talking of South Asia, effectively nuclear deterrence becomes a function of Goldilocks dilemma. How do you choose between very large extremes when there are at least 3 or 4 sets of options? So how does this work? Whatever India does, it will always be underbalancing China and overbalancing Pakistan in a conventional IR terminology. So how do we understand nuclear deterrence or strategic stability in South Asia? As has been alluded to earlier, one of the key limitations, even in the academic discussion, is a lot of our understanding is derived from bipolar dyadic context between Soviet Union and USA or India and Pakistan. South Asia now sits at the cross-section of 3 dyads, India and Pakistan, India and China, as well as China and US, because that global great power competition translating into force modernization and nuclear modernization also has its overall cascading impact on South Asia. Now, having laid out this backdrop, let me go into the more tangible domains of cyberspace and so on, and how these impact on the South Asian landscape. Cyber is a very interesting domain. We, of course, have issues of attributability and whether cyber by itself is an independent domain or a supportive domain for strategic operations. That is an ongoing debate in the broader strategic studies literature. With India, the cyber situation is very interesting. India has been the target of a lot of cyber attacks. We have seen it when the India-China confrontation has taken place. What is interesting, when the India-Pakistan standoff was taking place, actually there were cyber attacks on India, emanating from beyond South Asia, which spoke of non-state actors, and we are left to wonder how this ends. India particularly provides a very interesting paradox. At one level, it is known as a global cyber power due to its massive IT industries and so on. But when it comes to offensive cyber capabilities, it is, frankly speaking, forget being a power, it probably is a dwarf. And that is a paradox that is quite interesting, why that is the case. Moving over to outer space, as has been pointed out, we had kinetic kill anti-satellite tests demonstrated first by China, India, and also by Russia and USA. Now, what is interesting is when India demonstrated the anti-satellite test in 2019, there was a talk of that there will be dedicated military space organizations and doctrines. We have not seen much development on ground since then. So how does space feature into the thinking of strategic practitioners or military doctrines? That is still an open question, at least for us civilian analysts who rely on declassified materials and open source informations. The last point that I will make in this regard is also about force restructuring. As the session today talks about force modernization, which has a technological element, I'll also talk about force restructuring, which is how you are modernizing your forces, not just on technological terms, but also qualitatively through restructuring organizations or changes in doctrines. For a long while, we used to hear about the Colster doctrines, that India would have independent, small, brigade-level groups which would combine different elements from armor and air assets together to make very limited incursions in Pakistan in response to a major terrorist attack like the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks. We had seen over the last 10 years, there has been different media developments being reported in media. There was initially a talk of having a separate command for special operations and cyber and so on. Then there was this discussion that they would be rather be integrated as cells, not as commands. We don't hear of Colster so much now. We have seen specialized forces being restructured for the first time into commando battalions called Bhairav battalions to plug a gap between premier special forces versus specialized operations at the tactical level, but it's still not entirely fleshed out what that implies. We did hear, particularly from the first Chief of Defense Staff, General Wawat, about an independent rocket force. We do not know what's happening on the ground. There has not been much development that has come to notice. All of this seems that there's a bit of a flux in strategic thinking, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying, but which shows that strategic policymakers are responding to this very volatile element with a lot of spontaneity, but we do not know what that means in longer term strategic thinking. And I will lastly point out to a couple of very recent developments that have taken place over the last 1 or 2 years. We have the MIRV capability now with Indian missiles. So historically, missiles just carry one warhead. Now, missiles in Indian context do carry multiple warheads, which makes deterrence a much more complicated game. That in turn leads to questions of missile defense, which is a completely separate topic, which perhaps I can cover in Q&A sessions. But India does have MIRV capability now. there is the nuclear triad, the Indian SSBNs, the nuclear ballistic missile carrying submarines. There's 4 of them which are currently operational. The third one, sorry, 3 of them. The third one has become operational and commissioned just this month in April. The first one was in 2016, so almost 10 years since it started. We now have a full-fledged nuclear triad. India has demonstrated test flight of hypersonic missiles, but I believe it's still a work in progress because you need far more advancement to develop truly hypersonic arsenals. And no country has fully fledged hypersonic arsenals at the moment. It's globally a work in progress. Last, and my fourth point, those who follow the nuclear landscape know that this month the Indian prototype first breeder reactor achieved criticality. A large amount of the coverage on it has been rightly from the nuclear energy dimension. What is interesting to me as an outside observer is that these first breeder reactors are not safeguarded, which means that with the US-India nuclear agreement, India separated civilian versus military reactors. The fast breeder reactors were kept out of this. This was a big bone of contention back at the day between India and USA. So these are not subject to international safeguard treatments or inspections by IAEA. So technically, the fuel from the breeder reactor can actually also be used to develop further nuclear weapons. And why is that important? Because I think we all agree with the global nuclear order in flux and the strategic competition that we see, while Indian nuclear warheads has remained broadly static, it remains an option for Indian policymakers to see whether this is an option that they might want to pursue. And all of this leads to different kind of policy implications. And the most interesting question, which I think a lot of us are grappling with, looking back to South Asia and the stability instability paradox, does this mean somewhere the paradigm is changing? We need to think to new concepts and new postulates, what that means for the South Asian strategic stability. And I'll end my discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very fascinating kind of presentation and analysis of different topics related to nuclear stability. Well, this was really a very impressive, 2 very impressive presentations. I have a lot of questions, but because we don't have that much time, I will just ask you 2 questions and then open up for a new round of questions from our audience. So my 2 questions is, one is very general, one is very specific. My general question is missile defense. I mean, I didn't hear a lot on missile defense during our conversation. So what's the thinking on missile defense in South Asia, especially in India and Pakistan, but also, of course, in China? That's my first question. And my second question is, when we think about the stability instability paradox, it's usually that the weaker side in a diet usually kind of is much more willing to escalate on tactical level. We have seen this a lot between Pakistan and India, but I don't think we're seeing this a lot in terms of China and India. So why not, and can this be changing in the future? So these are my 2 questions. Gentlemen, who would like to?
Okay.
Sir.
So the first question was about, what is the first question?
Missile defense.
Yeah. No, I wanted to speak on it, but I was already running.
Yes. Huge topic.
Now with all these missiles being fired upon one another, there must be a lot of rethought about the effectiveness of missile defense itself as a larger concept. India has a missile defense program, and that is ongoing. It's been having that for a long time. Obviously, we don't have the capability nor the wherewithal to defend the entire airspace, but we have therefore decided that certain important areas are the ones where the missile defense will be located. And that's ongoing. But let us be very clear about something about missile defense. And that is what has actually been shown. You can have any amount of missile defenses, but to get one ballistic missile through those defenses especially now with the fact that decoys and the coming about of what he covered as the multiple independently targetable vehicles, MIRVs, that Pakistan has also got, India has also got, China has also got. So the fact is that with both these, that you can actually deceive the ballistic missile defenses itself, you can overload it if you want, and you have MIRVs. The limitations of ballistic missile defenses would now be with the powers that be better understood. It is not something on which it can reduce the damage. But when you talk about nuclear weapons here, this reduction of will be, you're speaking in terms of some million here and some million there. So don't forget that these are the most heavily populated geographies of the world. So all these, you're not going to be defending your own weapons, it will be most on your population centers. So the point is, although there is an ongoing thing, it looks like technology is has now more or less made the point that you can defend as much as one should, depending upon how much you can afford, but to depend upon the defense to protect you may not be a wise thing to do. That's the lesson which is probably now with the... what was the second question?
Well,
China.
China and instability, it's both toward you. I mean, if you, whoever would like to take it.
If we think that Op Sindoor has established a new normal, which has been discovered, that you can actually go up to a particular level and still remain below the threshold, you're actually pushing your luck. Because the point at issue is like this. The moment you get into a fight, and by the way, I just want to, cold start was a momentary thing which was put out. It died a death long back. There is no talk about cold start anymore. One thing India knows very well, that there are limitations to which you can exchange force between nuclear powers. The question is, what are those limitations? Because those limitations from application of military powers has to be translated into achievement of political objectives. That is the connection. After all, you are applying military force to achieve political objectives. Now, India does not believe, or it does not, you can say, publicly believe, that every time it reacts and applies force as an act of retribution to a terrorist attack, it is going to stop Pakistan from using terrorism as a tool of foreign policy against us. We do not harbor any such illusion. What we are saying is that we have the capability to punish you so that you will think more and be more careful about what you do next, or how do you use terrorism as policy. That's all that is possible. And that is so because of the fact that the movement forces are in contact. And right now, we have now more or less settled on to, it is mostly standoff attacks. We have crossed the LC, but mostly it is standoff. And air power has got one particular interesting capability, that the moment it takes off, and the moment you hit and you come back, it's all over in a very short time. You escalate and de-escalate very sharply. You can't do that when you put troops on the ground. The moment troops cross the LC, whether they are in tanks or they are in MICVs or they are on foot, then it is not suddenly you cross them and you take them back. That's a different ball game altogether. So one thing India has discovered, that the means of punishment, therefore, is best suited for the aerial means. That is probably what we are seeing being played out. I do not think that India has got this thing of wanting to launch its brigades across the LC and go and capture territory in Pakistan and that sort of thing, because that is not the price which India is willing or think is worth paying of getting into a major war with a country like Pakistan, because Pakistan is not our major threat. Our major threat is from that guy on the northern border called China. That we should not forget. So how do we deal with this guy must also be thought of, how we can deal with China. And if you ask me, why is actually China done what it did on our northern borders? It is actually a continuation, and this is a personal view, of its policy of containing India within the subcontinent. It has been using Pakistan for the same reason for a long time. Now it is also involved. The idea is it wants us to spend our resources on the northern border or with Pakistan, so that India does not emerge to be a maritime power of any consequences, because that is where India can make a difference in terms of its military wherewithal. Because the Indian peninsula juts out into the Indian Ocean like a sword. And it is through those waters that a lot of trade of these countries go on. Otherwise, if you think that China is doing it because we have constructed something, or they are taking away, or they want to recover their land, I don't think so. That is not the reason why China is doing what it is doing.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Shona, can you just comment very briefly
Very-
on my
very-
questions, and
very
then we'll
quickly.
open for
Yep.
further questions.
Very quickly, so I'll start with the question about China and India and stability paradox. Both China and India has a no first use, right? So the nuclear relation between them is entirely stable. That doesn't mean you don't have competition at the strategic level, which if you see the kind of the missile development that India does, particularly with Agni 5 and so on, it's clearly aimed at China. But it doesn't boil down necessarily at the tactical level. I'll stop myself there. In terms of missile defense, what last year showed was Indian missile defenses worked quite well, but missile defense is not a static phenomena. It's something that needs to be continuously upgraded. India has a multi-layered defense system with indigenous Israeli and Russian components, but I think very recently the Indian Air Force chief said that the next time we go in, it will be a different Pakistan because it already knows what we have and so on. And likewise, so it's something that India or any other country for that matter will needs to continuously upgrade and build and so on. And it would be interesting to watch at the global level with President Trump's Golden Dome, if that gets on. That will be a big change for missile defense globally, but also for space weapons, nuclear deterrence metrics, and overall. So that again will be something else which might change a lot of things in South Asia.
Great. Well, let me open the floor now to questions. In the interest of time, we'll gather probably three or four questions, and then we'll ask them to our panelists. So who would like to ask the question? Professor Ronald Joyson, please.
Yeah, thanks for the enlightening talk. So I did a very quick question, which is kind of the old chestnut, we've talked about stability, instability, we've talked about truncated asymmetry. So in the end, does nuclear weapons make South Asia, or this region comprising India and Pakistan, a safer place or a more dangerous place? Maybe there is no yes or no answer, but just wanted to hear your views.
Personally, I'm convinced.
Should we take all the questions?
I'm so sorry, sir. Let's gather just 2 or 3 more questions and then we'll. So sorry. So anybody else? Nishant, please.
I'll just speak.
Well, for the record,
Thanks to both the panelists for a wonderful presentation. The question I had was with the role of the US. It has traditionally played a bit of a mediating role, but now you see the role of the United States itself changing and what they conceive of their role globally should be. How do you think this will impact stability between India and Pakistan, especially when, at least in my view, both countries have to come to some sort of arrangement about de-escalation more by themselves than from international pressure. So, yeah.
and we'll gather 1 more question, please. Sandeep, that's our colleague Sandeep.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. Shanak, what you said about, a very interesting thing about that Indians try to push or they think that they push the threshold, the Pakistanis they think that they haven't, and the equilibrium has not been achieved. I feel like that's like the most dangerous thing that is going on right now. We talked so much about force posture and technologies and this and that. Is there anywhere right now conversation happening about CDMs, about arms control, about dialogue, about some sort of climbing down? It's been a year now, like some sort of bringing this bringing the dial back in some way. Is that conversation ever going to happen? Like, what's the thinking? Generally, you said that at the end of the day, these are responsible leaders who do realize that the enormous cost that is involved with this. Are they thinking about that? Is that conversation actually in some place happening?
Thank you. Sir, please.
So, let me put it like this. In my view, without the existence of nuclear weapons, India and Pakistan would have indulged in many wars. But the paradox is that because of nuclear weapons we haven't, but all we have to do is to make one misjudgment or miscalculation from either side, or purely accidental in nature. Because when military forces are engaged, then the force itself can develop a logic of its own. It's got the Clausewitzian trinity, which actually dictates, which is outside human agency because of friction and the hatred between them, the emotional state of these nations and so on. So this is the danger. So it has its good points, and let's hope it continues like this. But there is always a danger. To think that it will not happen is the most dangerous thing. What was the second question? Was about?
Regarding the US involvement and the changing.
Now that Pakistan is cozying up, but this, and if you look at their history of their relationship, it's not been an even this thing. So as long as Pakistan has, as of today, whatever is the relationship, if it endures, then Pakistan would like to leverage that whenever they have a problem with India, would like to use the Americans and for the leadership being what it is, they could very much exploit it. But I don't think that could be of concern to us, because they might try to get the Americans to be work in their favor, but we can work that through as long as we don't give in to whatever their demands are. And I don't, at the moment, if you look at the Pakistani role in the talks itself, it's very interesting to see as to what sort of a role, and the fact that they are acting as the sycophants of the Americans at this thing. So obviously, is it's sad to see a nation putting itself through such things. That's all I can say. Lastly,
Well, it was about arms control. The third question was about arms control,
yeah,
the CBM between India and
there
Pakistan.
is no talk at this point in time. You know, there's something called arms control paradox. That you have arms control when you don't need it, and when you need it, you don't have it. That's a paradox. Because when relationships decay and when they get bad, that's when all the arms control treaties, like it has happened, are unraveling. When they become good, then everybody has arm control. But the moment, this is what is happening now, especially with nuclear weapons, there's no treaty left. Nuclear non-proliferation treaty is still very much there. But otherwise, this is what it is. And anybody who will always can break the treaty whenever they want it, especially if they are powerful. And today, if you call it that the rule of the jungle is now the name of the game, everybody will break it if they can, even if they have it.
I didn't mean just arms control, de-escalation, any de-escalation effort of any kind.
Yeah. So the point is that if you have a crisis and you want de-escalation, unless you both mutually agree to the person who is going to de-escalate, between yourselves, you might be able, you do it because your own interests are involved. But if you have somebody else mediating within it, after all, in all the this thing which we have had with Pakistan, the Americans have always had some sort of a say in trying to bring the temperature down. It's only in Sindoor where we said that they had nothing to do with it. I mean, that's one. If you see any of all the other things, they had it. So the fact is that as long as both parties are interested in de-escalation, this can happen. They can find a way to do it, get somebody involved in it. But if they are not interested, then it is not possible, even if one party is not interested.
I'm sorry, sorry, one quick question. Which party is not interested currently?
I am not putting into any particular situation. I'm giving you a generalized.
Okay, but we have to move on. So please, Shaunak.
I'll be short, I promise. First, with the question about whether nuclear weapons have made South Asia a safe place or a dangerous place, I think the response is it's a glass half full. It's that kind of a response. But if you look at it back historically, it goes into counterfactual, but realistically, by the late 90s, India had no option but to test a nuclear weapon the way the international nuclear framework was evolving with CTBT. Many people actually do not realize this now. In the 1980s, the Pakistani nuclear program had actually progressed much more than the Indian nuclear program, and India had to play catch up. Last but not the least, I think India is always conscious and have always been tried to be a great power, right? And let's face the fact, in international politics, if power is the rule of the game, then the ultimate currency is nuclear weapon. You simply cannot be a great power without nuclear weapons. So that's there. From the Indian point of view, in a way, nuclear weapons might have actually served India very well. You look at Pakistan 30 years now from 1998, you have the Pakistani army chief saying, we are like that dirt truck trying to stop a Mercedes, referring to India's economic rise. I think that brilliantly works for India, with Pakistan being forced to spend so much on military. What is the state of Pakistan today? So that is something that's not often discussed, but I would not like to rule out. Nishant had the question of the role of US. So right now there is no existing crisis communication or a recognized mediator between India and Pakistan. This also ties in with Sandeep's point. The US looks increasingly less certain that the US will again play a meaningful role, partly because of the domestic political priorities of US and so on, but also because whenever US had intervened, it had intervened behind the doors. Is India going to respond to that, let's say even 5 years down the line? I don't think so. Having said that, different kind of actors might play that role, not necessarily mediator, but using the diplomatic tools of good offices and back channel and so forth. And I think 2021, when India and Pakistan agreed to a ceasefire control, a lot of it was through the goodwill and back offices of UAE. So you can actually have smaller powers which are not part of the region being acting in good faith and having a kind of a back channel dialogue, which leads to Sandeep's point. Existing CBMs like India and Pakistan notifying each other before their missile tests and so on are existing. There is practically right now no scope of arms control of CBMs because, for the simple reason, two sides are not on official talking terms. The interesting point of view, which we actually, we nuclear scholars are guilty of, we don't sometimes see the broader strategic landscape that we're looking solely at nuclear. You look at the Indus Water Treaty, like that being discarded as something was unthinkable, right? So it remains to be seen how India is looking at various tools to coerce Pakistan, right? So it may easily go into domains now beyond the nuclear, and which is a political choice. And if we look at the arms control regimes now, since the last 5 years, globally arms control is in decline. CNF treaty in Europe, INF treaty in Europe, conventional forces in Europe, CFE treaty, New START, all of them have collapsed. ABM treaty has collapsed. So right now the world is entering into a phase where there's going to be great power competition and strategic arms modernization. So this is not the time for arms control, whether we like it or not. So I'm sorry to end on that pessimistic note, but I'll stop there. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Regrettably, we're running out of time. So I would like very much to thank General Prakash Menon and Dr. Shunak Seth. It was a very fascinating discussion. So thank you so much, gentlemen. And I would like to thank very much our audience for wonderful questions. And I'm sorry that we didn't have more time for them, but another good reason why we'll invite both our panelists kind of once again to have a continuation of this very interesting discussion. I would like to thank RSIS very much for co-organizing this event with us, and in particular, I would like to thank Mr. Nishant Rajiv for playing a key role in organizing this. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.